Welcome to From the Ground Up. I am Megan Haupert, and I have my co-host here, Scott Galden. Scott, how was your week this week?
Megan, I had a great week, had a great weekend. I had my entire family in. Both daughters and both son-in-laws were here this weekend, and so we had a full house. And Colby had a great weekend with both of his sisters. He just loved every minute he was with them. And then we got to go to DFW Airport for time number 95 and 96, because Colby keeps track of everything, okay? He can tell you exactly how many times we were at Terminal C. So regardless, it was a lot of fun, had a great weekend. How about you? Except for the Colts.
It was not so much Minshew mania, unfortunately, but hey, we're used to it at this point in time, and the Colts, as Colts season ticket holders. We actually had family weekend this weekend as well. I have two sets of aunt and uncles that live in Arizona, and my dad's sister and her husband were up for the week, and they have a son that lives in Shreveport, and he came up, and then their other son lives about an hour from us. Our whole family, both my dad's siblings and all their kids were able to come to the house, and we hung out and cooked out and grilled out and just hung out. We haven't been all of us together in one place like that for quite some time. So it was really awesome. It was really special.
And just to give a quick preview at the end or toward the end of tonight's session, we're going to be talking about family, and we're going to be talking about how to keep peace in the family. We're going to talk about insurance to start with. So if you just decide, hey, I know everything about insurance, you might want to skip over that, because we're going to talk about some important things about family and faith as part of this as well. So I know, Megan, we've done 2 shows so far about it. Is it right? 2 shows so far about insurance. And
Yep.
Now we're going to do probably about 2 more, because we think that's how long it takes to really get to understand insurance. So if I'm getting my diagnosis and trying to figure out what to do with my child, what's the next step in the insurance game that we need to know about?
So we've talked the previous 2 episodes about what type of information we need to gather and obtain during the first stages of the diagnosis and looking at the insurance piece, determining what benefits look like. Is there coverage within my plan? What does that coverage look like? Are there any potential roadblocks? And so tonight, what I want to talk about are, what if I do hit a roadblock? Where do I go next? And so, again, I want to preface this with anything and everything you are given information-wise from the insurance company, get it in writing as much as you can. If you can't get it in writing, make sure that you ask who the representative is that you're speaking with, get a reference number for the phone call, the date, the time, all of that information. You can ask them to email you a copy of it, fax it, because should you have to go through an appeals process, all of that documentation will be critical to present on your behalf or your child's behalf. The first thing is, if you do hit a roadblock, we have to determine, is it a denial? What type of denial is it? Is it a coverage denial, meaning that my plan doesn't cover the autism treatment that I'm seeking out? Is it a full denial? Is it a partial denial? So what I mean by that is, are they denying everything completely, meaning they're not going to pay for any of it? Or are they only denying part of it, where they're only going to pay a small portion of that coverage? And once you can determine that, it navigates you to down different paths of what approaches there are. Any sort of denial should always come with addition.
Let me ask this,
Go ahead,
because
Scott.
I think this may be important. Whenever you get a denial, there's an immediate emotional response. You're going to be really frustrated. How do you maybe get over that immediate emotional response to make sure that you stay very objective when you're dealing? Because it's real important that you stay objective in these situations, right?
Absolutely. And I also think it's okay to process your emotions too. It's okay to be mad. Sometimes you just take a day. You read it, you're mad, you're frustrated. Get all of that out and say, okay, all right, we're done. I'm done with that. Now, what's my next step? Because I'm not taking no for an answer. And so that's where a lot of the times as a provider, I've helped take over for families of, I understand you're frustrated. They don't even know what the next step is. And so to help guide them through that process of, what are my options? Because a lot of people think, once it's denied, I have no more options. I don't. And that's not the case. There are
You just
different
have to
appeal
look at
processes.
that as the opening. That's just their opening salvo. That's just that's what they tell everybody. You've got to be the person that says, I'm going to work with this until I get a different answer on it.
Yeah. And there have been families that have fought through these and that have literally changed the trajectory of treatment for kids with autism because of their fight. And There's one, just to give you an example, I'm not going to use any names or any major funding sources, but there was a big funding source in the state of Texas who put out a lifetime limit on visits for ABA several years ago, and it opened into a class action lawsuit, and they lost. And so now they don't require authorizations for ABA treatment. They don't, it was a big deal, but it was because there was a group of families who fought because they knew that their rights and their child's rights were being violated. So, like I said, this is where I get all fired up. So I'm probably going to get a little bit spicy on here. I'll try to stay calm, but just going back to that, if you get that emotional response, I need to take a moment and calm down. It's okay to be upset, angry, and frustrated, but then you got to put your hat on and be like, all right, it's game time. We got to figure out a game plan and how we're going to go about this. And no, sometimes it doesn't always mean no. It just means not right now, or it means we got to take a different path. And just going back to figuring out, what is that roadblock? Is that a full denial? Is it a partial denial? Are they not wanting to cover the provider I want to see, which is an out-of-network type of denial? Or is it a visit limitation or a lifetime limit? So they're telling me, no, you can't see the provider you want. Are they telling me, no, we're not paying for any of it? Are they telling me, you can have it, but we're only going to pay for X amount of visits? And once you determine those roadblocks, then it determines which path you're going to take. So I want to talk a little bit about the first roadblock. So if there is a denial issue of a full coverage denial, you need to figure out what type of plan you have. Do you have a self-funded plan, or do you have a commercial plan? And self-funded plans, a lot of the times, when you have a self-funded plan, you're at the mercy of the employer because they pay all of the claims and they can determine what's covered and what's not covered. And I have had families who've had plans like that, and what they've done is they've actually gone to their HR department and said, hey, this is not a covered benefit on our plan, and I would really like for it to be. And a lot of times, sometimes it's just they're not educated on what ABA is or what the treatment for autism is. And I've had companies that have added it to their benefits in the next benefit year. Sometimes it's just a level of education and letting them know these are services out there that can help my child. Sometimes they've never had a child. If it's a very small company, they've never had a kiddo with autism on one of their policies before. So they're not really aware of what those things are. Excuse me. The other thing I wanted to talk about too, what's called MAPIA, and that is the Mental Health Parity Act. What that says, this is something that I learned a couple of years ago that was really eye-opening and has actually helped me in several different cases with insurance companies. Insurance companies have two sides of a policy. They have a mental health benefit side and they have a medical side. Because autism is a diagnosis that comes within the DSM, it qualifies as a mental health benefit. And what was happening is insurance companies had different levels of benefits. So like on a medical side, a copay for maybe a doctor's visit for a specialist would have been like $40. But on the mental health side, that copay was like $140. The requirements for each side of the policy were vastly different. And MAPIA came around and said, that's not right. You can't require certain things for medical treatment that are vastly different from a mental health benefit standpoint. And what that does, it basically it evens the playing field for individuals seeking services and benefits for mental health. That includes substance abuse, counseling, all kinds of those sort of things where the families are not having to pay a different amount of copay for those types of treatments than they would for a doctor's visit or an ENT visit, those sort of things. MAPIA, which is what we call it, basically states that private health insurance companies can't impose copays or prior authorizations or other requirements on a mental health or substance abuse disorder benefit side that are more restrictive than are imposed on the medical or surgical benefits side. That's something once you learn your benefits and you're like, this copay is just ridiculous or this deductible is really high, how does it compare to the medical side? You can argue that. There was actually a large insurance company several years ago that had to pay millions and millions of dollars back because they had implemented some of these unrealistic costs for patients. And so they had violated MAPIA. The next thing I want to talk about just a little bit is just knowing your state's mandate. So once you know your policy, once you know what's covered and what's not covered, if you hit any roadblocks, looking into what your autism state mandate says. Every state has a mandate which requires coverage of some level for ABA treatment. And so every policy within that state has to follow that mandate. But it is important to note that if you are, like, let's say your insurance policy is out of Washington State, but you live in Texas, your policy is required to follow the Washington State mandate, not the Texas mandate. So it's important to know that you've got to make sure you know what state your policy is based out of and what that mandate is.
What are some of the problems you've seen people overcome by just being consistent and, I'm not going to say demanding, but just not letting go? What are some things you've seen happen for people that are persistent and saying, I'm not going to take the first answer?
So I've had a family that was denied total coverage for their child because the insurance company claimed that the parents were not attending parent trainings. Parent trainings is another pretty common denial that insurance companies will try to use when it comes to coverage of ABA treatment. They can't do that. That's like me punishing your child if they're on a prescription because mom and dad aren't giving them the medication. You can't do that. That's not implementing effective treatments. We went through because when you have an appeals process with the insurance company, you have your first level of internal appeals, which means you have to appeal it within that funding source. I'm just going to use Blue Cross Blue Shield because they're a major example, but if I have an appeals process with them, I have to go internally with them with Blue Cross Blue Shield and have them review it. And if they still uphold that denial, then I get to have the opportunity to go to an external review, which is people that are not employed by that insurance company or not. It's a completely separate group of individuals reviewing everything that's not obviously financially involved or involved with that funding source. So I've definitely worked with families if they're completely denying because of parent training, and I'm like, you can't do that. We actually got that one overturned and won that. So there was a little bit of a break in services, but the child was able to come back for treatment. I've had kiddos that have had treatments denied hour-wise. We went through the process and we got our hours back that we had asked for because they were wrongfully denied based on what the insurance company had said. And sometimes families, for them, it's just easier to not fight their current funding source. And a lot of them will maybe go out and get an individual policy for their child to cover ABA. Just that sometimes is a little bit easier of a path for them, a little bit more cost effective, especially if they're really wanting to get their kiddo into treatment, into services right away.
Maybe we could talk about that, because my guess would be for some policies, typically if your child is younger, its cost is not that high, and you may be able to get better coverage by going out and getting an individual policy than trying to just stay with that group rate. So for those of you that are finding that your group policy doesn't cover enough, there's out there that sell some really nice individual policies and some of them are by, I think Blue Shield even has some individual policies that are out there, and of some of the changes with the Affordable Care Act, they have to cover and they have to issue.
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of the Affordable Care Act. It did allow more access to coverage. No pre-existing was a thing anymore. And most company, at least in Texas, because that's where I've obviously practiced, that's where my knowledge and experience is. Most of the major funding sources, insurance companies do have policies on that. And they vary too. Some people would just prefer to pay the copay every day and be done with it. Some would rather hit that deductible max out of pocket if their child's receiving multiple therapies, and just being able to break down the cost of that premium every month compared to what the out-of-pockets and max is going to be. And when they compare it to what the other coverage is, it sometimes actually is a little bit more cost-effective for them. So, Scott, now that I think we've lulled all of our listeners to sleep with all the insurance stuff, I think it'd be a good time to kind of transition to our faith piece of the podcast. We had a question or kind of response from one of our listeners on our Facebook page, and I wanted to mention it and get your thoughts on it. They had just asked, what are some ways to discuss disabilities in church without jumping straight into praying the ASD away or praying the autism away, and how to navigate those types of conversations in a faithful way? And I thought, you've been there. We'd love to hear your insight and your experience and perspective on that.
I would say that the thing that, as somebody that struggled with this, is don't make that person question their faith just because God's not creating a miracle in their life right now. God doesn't promise that he's going to do that. And, if he chooses, he has the power to do that, but that doesn't happen in every case. Be sensitive to that. And the other thing is I think you have to be real careful about saying things like, God knew what he was doing when he gave you Colby, or, because you guys are such great parents. I know what that person is trying to tell me is that you're doing a great job as a parent and you're glorifying God. I hear that, but I also hear, well, you're the one that's going to have to take over this very, very difficult path because, quite frankly, I don't want to be on that path. It's not the path I asked for. I'd much rather be on a different one. Now that I'm on it, I'm going to do the best I can to glorify God with it, but it's not one that I chose. So I think we have to be real careful about that. And it kind of ties into a story that I think is really, really critical. It's in the book of Daniel, and it's when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are being bound and about to be thrown into this fiery furnace because they disobeyed the king's orders. And the king says, well, what are you going to do about God now? And they respond, look, our God's capable of rescuing us. We know that. But even if he doesn't, that doesn't mean that it's going to cause us to question our God or lose our faith. And I call that the even if he doesn't level of faith. And as a parent with an autistic child, I feel like I got a lot stronger in my faith when I kind of developed even if he doesn't level of faith, where it was one that said, yes, I'm going to continue to pray for this miracle, but even if he doesn't, I'm going to still honor him. I'm going to still use this to try to glorify him. I think that kind of our Christianity today is very transactional. It's almost like, okay, God, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. But if you don't do this for me, I'm not going to do this for you. I don't think God talks about a transactional relationship with us. He created us for one purpose, and that's to serve and glorify him. He's not our butler. Our job is to serve him. His job is not to serve us. I don't want to go too deep into this, but that's just something that I really had to spend a lot of time thinking on and focusing on to quite frankly, get out of a little bit of a dark place I was in when we were first going through this. Does that kind of fit with some of the things that you've thought about as far as parents dealing with autism and the faith journey there?
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that going on your transactional piece, we've become a society where it's me, us, right? And we are constantly looking at how we are, and we want God to fix things, and we want him to correct things and do what we want. We don't focus on the ultimate relationship is
Yes.
us serving him. And I think that, like you said, the people that make these comments, they're not coming from a bad place. I think it's just it's a perspective, right? And as you grow in your faith, as you are further down your path in your walk with God, your perspective changes and your insight of how do I handle this changes. And I can't think of please correct me if I'm wrong. And I am by no means an theologist or anything by any means. I'm far from it. But I'm pretty sure that every person in the Bible that God used, they screwed up somehow. They were
Yes.
far from perfect. So God works in ways and works in people that are so far from perfect. And I personally think Colby's perfect, but that's just me. Gosh, I love him. But I think we have to consider that too. We can't wait for things to be perfect. We can't wait for cures to happen. And I think we've referenced in the past of there's laws in place that God has put into place that cause things to happen. Cancer happens. Somebody's in a car accident. Those things happen. We have to live by faith, not by
Yes.
feeling.
Yes.
Right? This is not about right now. This is not about this. It's about the promise. It's about the end. He tells us that at the end, everything it's good. I've got it figured out, guys. I've got it. You just got to trust me in that journey. And I think living by faith and not by feelings, this is a mindset. It's okay to have those feelings. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be mad. But ultimately, that faith feeling, that faith and living by that faith has to come at the forefront.
Well, and one of the things I'm kind of reminded now that I'm in the backside of life is my life is a series of like chapters in a book. When you're in chapter 3 and 4, you don't know how chapter 15 and 16 are going to go. Now that I'm in chapter 15 and 16, I recognize I have some scars to show some of the struggles I've been in. Okay. They're not physical scars, but like physical scars, they're there. I can look at them. I can see where the hurt's been. I know what it looks like, but there's been some healing, and I wouldn't trade those scars for any amount of money because they've made me who I am today. I have strengths today that I would never have had we not been on this journey. And that involves several different journeys I've been on in my life, that I'm a stronger person because of it. And when you're in the battle, it's hard to see that. As you get a little bit further down the road, you can start to see I'm stronger today. One of the things that I would counsel people that are going through this is where you have to be patient and you have to be willing to wait. And one of the things that I see in a lot of autistic families is they want an answer now, as fast as I can get it. God, give it to me now. Or BCBA, I need to see that now. Or doctor, I need to see this now. And it doesn't work that way. Autism is more a marathon than it is a sprint. It takes time to get there, and it's about doing things on a daily basis to get you to the end. It's not going to happen quickly. And you have to set up your days in a way that you make a little progress today, you make a little progress tomorrow, you make a little progress the next day, and then 3 years down the road, it's like, wow, look at what we've been able to accomplish. So I just have to counsel people to be a little bit patient along those lines as well.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of transitioned us into our family piece of what we wanted to talk about tonight, Scott, and keeping peace in that family. PEAC,
Well,
not
and
PIEC.
you've probably seen this, Megan. I've seen a lot of families that are dealing with autism, and quite frankly, they're in a state of chaos. And I understand that. I understand that chaos. There's a lot of families without autistic kids that are in chaos, right? So why should they be any different? Okay, but at the same time, you and I know this: kids with autism need a stable, peaceful environment in which to thrive in. And chaos is probably the worst thing for them. And as a parent, that means you've got to make some real specific decisions on how you're going to live your life from here forward. And it's going to probably cause you to have to change things that may not necessarily be your default switch. You may have to change your default switch from chaos over to planned, structured life. You may have to do that, but that's what's important for your autistic child right now. And that peaceful, predictable environment is what they need in order to grow and excel and adapt. And if you may have the greatest therapist in the world, but if you've got a chaotic house, they may not be able to accomplish all that they're capable of. So and what I wanted to talk about tonight is how do you establish that peaceful, stress-free household when chaos is just one outburst away, right? It's one bad thing away and you've got chaos again. So,
And we know kids with autism struggle with anxiety and fear, and anxiety is due to fear because of not knowing what's going to happen. That's
yes.
just anybody in general. My kids, neurotypical, if we are off schedule, like it's chaos, and
Yes.
it makes me anxious. And so schedule, and I don't want people to think that they have to have like by this time every day like that. No, but kids need to be able to predict what's going to happen, because when they can predict what's going to happen, there's less anxiety, there's less fear, there's less worry, and there's comfort in that. I know what's going to happen every single day. I know what's going to happen every single night. And if things shift a little bit one day, it's okay. But the overall schedule and routine of the day needs to be the same or as consistent as possible. Dinner time around the same time every night. We do dinner, and it doesn't have to necessarily be time, because I know there's families that have multiple kids, they're running everywhere, but the same
The
things
process
happening.
would
So
be the
like
same, right? Yes.
yes, dinner, shower, brush teeth, bed, and starting with that, just the evening time, so that kids know what's predictable. Sometimes what I've learned in working with families, I can tell them this all day long, but until it's put into some sort of visual or a list, it doesn't happen. And then when they're able to do that and the kids are able to have that, they actually keep the parents
Yes.
on track a little bit more. Because when the parents are reinforced, the parents see that this is successful, it brings that level of anxiousness and chaos around the house down a little bit. So they're more apt to engage in that. Okay, we got to get on this schedule. This routine is nice. And the kids, they know what's supposed to happen. I don't have to constantly be on them about when we're going to do the next thing. And I have a couple examples of things that I use with my kids here. Now, please don't take me for my kid. My house is not chaos because it can be a lot of the times, in all honesty. But we try our best with
You said
schedules.
having your own children caused you to
I
not
mean,
judge people nearly as much, right? It's like,
yes,
okay.
yes. There's parents and families I worked with before I had kids, and we would talk about bedtime, and I'm like, "Your kids should not sleep in your bed. They should be alone." And now I'm like, "Oh, if I could just talk to
I've
those
got some
families now, like,
apologizing.
oh, yeah." I'm like, "Remember that conversation we had?" Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. But this is something just really simple that my boys have in their lockers. They have little cubbies that they keep their backpacks and stuff in. And so when they come home from school, they know what the schedule is. Now, that doesn't mean that it's exact same. It's 20 minutes every night or 20 minutes this and then this, but it allows them to at least have an idea of what it looks like. Grayson has to read every day for 20 minutes when he gets home from school. What I do is I just make this little schedule for them. It says read a book. So he knows when he gets home at night, that's the first thing he's going to do. And then I put some other choices for him and he can just move it down. And so he's my little anxious guy. He has a little bit of anxiety, but this helps him. And so he'll go and check his schedule. He actually told me, it was probably about a month ago. I hadn't quite gotten this out yet for him. And he's, "Mom, do you still have my schedule? Can we put it out?" And I'm like, "Absolutely. It'll help me keep on track too. Keeps me accountable." So I think that's something, a simple thing that families can do. And there's free schedules all over Pinterest, and you can Google those left and right all day long. But it doesn't have to be big and fancy. So if your child's able to read, just write it down. I know Colby, that for him, he likes to have a schedule and he likes to have a routine. And if you just write down what he has to do,
He's
he's
a
good with
rule
it.
follower. He will do exactly what's listed on
He
that
is.
paper, and try to around. It's like,
Yep.
do this 10 times. He's going to do it 10 times, but don't ask him to do it 11.
Do 11.
Yeah. That's
Or
it.
9.
We're going to do 10 and that's it. I guess to some extent, what you have to recognize is with autistic kids, you've got to learn to play the game by their rules. They have a set of rules that they're going by that gives them comfort. And a lot of times it's those steady, predictable things, right? That's their set of rules. If you'll play by their rules, it's a whole lot easier than playing by your rules. Use that to kind of shape their behavior.
Another thing, Scott, I don't have it on me, but we all have these phones, right? We all have these things that are with us all the time. Guess what? They have timers on them. And I can't tell you how many times my timer has been used to set expectations for kids. Okay, you're going to be done with this in 10 minutes. You're going to be done with this in 5 minutes. Dinner's over in 15. Or go to Walmart and get a little digital timer in the kitchen department for $6. And you then can start to set really basic expectations for kiddos during those times at home. If I know I'm just as guilty as the next parent where I'm like, okay, 10 more minutes on this show, and then it's 25 minutes later because I got distracted cleaning the kitchen or something like that. That's another thing that you can use that'll help keep you accountable, because we've got to make sure when we're being, as the parents, when putting expectations into place, we're following through with them, because kids learn so quickly, autistic or not. Mom says this and they don't follow through. Guess what? Next time I'm pushing it a little bit further.
That works for neurotypical kids as well, because our oldest daughter, Chelsea, used to have a hard time getting dressed and ready for school. So Julie would have the timer set on the microwave. She would say, okay, when the timer goes off, then you have to go do this. Or, by the timer goes off, you need to be prepared for that. And it would be to the point where Chelsea would be like, oh no, not the timer. But it would make her do the things she knew she had to do before that timer went off, right? And teaching your child to be responsible for themselves and not you having to be responsible for them. And it's a skill that we're hoping for by the time they're 17, 18, something like that, One of the things I think is a big challenge that I wanted to talk about that I see on discussion boards all the time is I have a hard time getting my child to go to sleep. My autistic child, I'm having a hard time at bedtime and getting them to go to sleep. I don't want to sound like I've got all the answers, because I don't. But I do know this, that in a lot of cases, if you set aside and you disciplined yourself as a parent to follow the exact same process every time, starting early in the evening, okay, we're going to take a bath at this time. We're going to read book at this time. We're going to lay down in bed at this time. In our house, we say a prayer every night. We also say, what was your favorite part of the day? We have a discussion before Colby goes to bed where each one of us talks about what our favorite part of the day was. And Colby has to ask, Daddy, what was your favorite part of the day? Mommy, what was your favorite part of the day? And so there's this routine, and I'm not going to say that it worked the first time. I'm not going to say that it worked the second time, but about the 10th or 12th time, it started yielding benefits for us. And I would encourage parents, set a goal and then be willing to work the process long enough to give it a shot to work. Don't give up on the second try when it doesn't work as well as you hoped it would. They will get it. You've got to give it a little bit of time.
Commit yourself to
Yes.
a time frame. We're going to do this for
Yes.
2 weeks, or we're going to do this for 3 weeks. I wish I had the stat in my head, but it's gone now. I want to say it's
28
if you do
days.
something
Well, it's
28
28
times,
days leads to a new habit.
28
Yeah.
days. Okay. It
Yep.
is up there.
Yep.
I just, wrong file. Yeah, that's a month. So commit to it for 1 month. Kids struggle with sleep, like you said, but those routines help.
When you're out in public, my wife did this to perfection. We were at a wedding one time, and we could see Colby was getting a little bit upset. I mean, he's just sitting there, it's not knowing what to do. Well, they had a guide for, here's the things that are going to happen in the wedding. And what she did, she took that sheet of paper and she put a box in front of each one of those lines, right? And then as they finished that line, she gave Colby a pencil, and so he could check off, okay, here's where that's over with. And he knew that at the end of this, it would be over, and he could see predictably what it was going to do. Now, the only problem with that was in the song, they listed the songs they were going to play, and they had one song that was listed as a Bach song. It was a Mozart, and Colby knows his music. And so when he got to that song and he started playing that song, he started screaming out, Mozart, Mozart, Mozart. It was a little embarrassing, we had to say, okay. And then so we penciled in Mozart on the program. Yeah. And again, not every autistic kid is the same. Mine was completely different than yours, but there are some principles that we can use in a lot of these cases. And I think that's important. And it goes back to, one of the things that we talked about is the stress that couples that have autistic children are under. And if we want to accomplish anything in this podcast, is we want to keep your family together, have a strong family, have a strong unit so that you can support that child. And the more peaceful your house is, the less stress there is, the more you guys can be a strong unit. So take some of these ideas, commit to having a peaceful household whenever you can, and try to look at things that create chaos and eliminate those things. It will give you a stronger marriage, and it'll give you a stronger household. So hopefully that was a tip that will help you over time. Megan, what are some things we need to ask people to do this week? We got a couple of things that we've got requests for.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing I want to say is if you've liked what you've heard here on our podcast, go ahead and click the thumbs up button down below. Subscribe to our channel. You also can follow us on our Facebook page, From the Ground Up. And your likes and your subscriptions help others be able to find us. We talk to the families of kids with autism, but I think what we share is also valuable to other families members as well. Aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, grandparents, because it helps give them some insight too of how they can
Yes.
support as well. If you know somebody that has a cousin or an aunt or an uncle that is experienced somebody in their family with autism, I hope that our information is beneficial to them as well. So be sure to share this with others so that we can be found and that we can hopefully bless and encourage more and more folks. I did talk a couple weeks ago, my website, haupertconsulting.com, there is a free checklist for families who just received their autism diagnosis. So please go there and download that information. It'll help navigate through these steps we have been talking through the last 3 weeks about insurance and answer some of those questions and concerns and roadblocks that families may face. Scott, you want to talk a little bit about the Hills?
Yeah, if you happen to be in Tarrant County and are looking for a church home, we would love to have you be a part of it. We have a respite program at all 3 of our campuses. We have Sunday morning a Bible class for special needs kids every Sunday morning. And in a couple of our campuses, we have some small groups for families with special needs children. We're a church that believes that we're here to serve, and we want to serve those families. So if you're in the area, you're looking for a church that can support your family, that if you have a special needs child, please look up thehills.org. We have 3 campuses. One is in Keller, One's in North Richland Hills and the other is in West Fort Worth. If you'll email me, I'll be happy to put you in contact with one of our special needs ministers at a campus that's close to you. We'd love to have you part of our family. We definitely want to make this content very applicable to help you in your life. So if you've got a question, put it either through Facebook or send us an email. We'd be happy to answer it on air. And we love your feedback. And thank you for your support and your prayers. Megan, anything else for this evening?
I don't think so. I'm just excited for all the questions.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.